Hello. This video is a part three to a multiple series multiple part video series of me responding to an article and of me essentially like clearing up on a lot of things, and it's also kind of like yeah, just giving my opinions on on an article that I disagree with, and essentially trying to essentially clear up on a lot of things, and at least wither away the recent wave of Stalinism that has gone into YouTube and gone into basically on the internet as well, in an actual Marxist perspective as well. This is a response to a video made by an author that goes by the name of Caelliox online, who runs an education project called Socialism 101. Has made an article called The Question of Building Socialism in One Country, and this video series is called, well, The Question of Deconstructing Socialism in One Country. Yeah, this video, or at least like the beginning of this video right now, is going to be here. Caelliox tries to attack theory of permanent revolution developed by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, and analyzed by Vladimir Lenin, and defended and analyzed by Leon Trotsky, and built on by Karl Radek, at least at one point, Max Chapman, until 1956, Joseph Carter, Hale Draper, and so many other authors. So, without further ado, let's see what he has to say about the theory and his understanding of it. What is the theory of permanent revolution? Did Lenin support it? Firstly, let's define clearly the term permanent revolution. For this purpose, we should quote Trotsky. He proceeds to quote the introduction of the permanent revolution by Leon Trotsky. He goes to this quote by Leon Trotsky in the introduction of the permanent revolution by, well, Leon Trotsky. The perspective of permanent revolution may be summarized in the following way. The complete victory of the democratic revolution in Russia is conceivable only in the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat leaning on the peasantry. The dictatorship of the proletariat, which would inevitably place in order of the day not only the democratic but socialistic task as well, would at the same time give a powerful impetus to the international socialist revolution. Only the victory of the proletariat in the West could protect Russia from the bourgeois restoration and assure the possibility of rounding out the establishment of socialism. Leon Trotsky, The Permanent Revolution. This is definitely something good from Caelliox, supposedly reading Leon Trotsky to actually understand what he is saying and give a discussion about it. Although, for us to realize, and Caelliox here has to realize this, Leon Trotsky giving a very simplified perspective of permanent revolution. In fact, I plan on making a video presentation to help out people better understand permanent revolution and what that means, because a lot of people still have a bit of a hard understanding of it. But if you would like, you could watch some videos I might provide in the description to better understand permanent revolution. Anyways, of course, to continue. What did Lenin have to say about this so-called permanent revolution theory? He proceeds to take an out-of-context quote from Lenin. Of course he does. We could go on and on about what Lenin said before the October Revolution, but that would be worthless. Why? Because Trotskyists are already full aware of this, but their argument is somewhat different than one may expect. He is referring to this quote that is very much taken out of context. At the end of 1903, Trotsky was an erudite Menshevik, i.e. he deserted from the Iskaris to the economists. He said that between the old Iskra and the new lies at a gulf, in 1904 to 05, he deserted the Mensheviks and occupied the facilitating position, now cooperating with Martov, the economist, now proclaiming his absurdity left permanent revolution theory. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under the cover of Outcries for Unity. The use of this quote is by far an insult to Vladimir Lenin, especially his criticisms of Leon Trotsky here is not permanent revolution, rather his, at the time, dogmatic fetishization for looking at unity with people no better than liberals, his absolute bureaucratic ideas for the vanguard that retain the Trotskyist position that intelligentsia must lead the proletariat in the revolution, rather than seeing the Marxist interpretation of one, there is no intelligentsia class, only the advanced advanced understanding proletariat. 2. Once the proletariat are educated, the role of the advanced educated proletariat would then naturally be negated, and the proletariat would already be educated. Thus, it would be up to the formations of democratic centralism for the proletariat to discuss, debate, and vote on what needs to be done for revolutionary action, and have the means to do so. And a specialization of looking at the world of a bourgeois economist, rather than a proletarian revolutionary with a firm praxis. This has nothing to do with the theory of permanent revolution, rather how he looks at it during this time, as well as his Caelliox and bureaucratic positions at the time as well. Trotsky calls his new journal not non-factional. He puts this word on the top of the line in his advertisements. This word is stressed by him in every key of the editorial articles of Borba itself, and as well as in the liquidation of Servina Rabochia Gazeta. I can't fucking speak Russian. Which carried on the article of Borba by Trotsky. Before the latter began publication, what is this non-factionalism? Trotsky's Workers' Journal is Trotsky's journal for workers, as there is not a trace of either workers' initiative or any connection of the working class organizations. Desiring to write in a popular style, Trotsky in his journal for workers explains the benefit of his readers and the meaning of such foreign words as territory, factor, and so forth. Very good, but why not also explain the workers and the meaning of the word non-factionalism? Is that word more intelligible than the words territory and factor? No, that is not the reason. The reason is that the label non-factionalism is used of the worst representatives of the worst remains of factionalism to mislead the younger generation of the workers. It is worthwhile devoting a little time to explaining this. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under the cover of the Outcries for Unity. He continues, although there is no group division, i.e. nominal recognition of unity, but actual disunity among you, Providus, there is still something worse, namely splitting tactics. We are told this, exactly what Trotsky says. Unable to think on his ideas and get his arguments to hang together in his rants against the group division on one moment and the next shouts of splitting tactics and the winning on one suicidal victory after another. This statement can only one mending the Providus are winning one victory after another. This is an objectively verifiable fact established by a study of the mass working class and movement during the say of 1912 and 1913. But I, Trotsky, denounced the Providus, 1, as splitters, and 2, as suicide politicians. Let us examine this. First of all, we must express our thanks to Trotsky. Not long ago, from August 1912 to February 1914, he was at one with F. Dan, who, as well as known, threatened to kill anti-liquidationism, and called upon others to do so. At present, Trotsky does not threaten to kill our trend and our party. Don't be angry, Citizen Trotsky. This is true. He only promises that it will kill itself. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under cover of Outcries for Unity. He continues as well to say, needless to say, this explanation of highly flattering to Trotsky and to all 5 groups aboard and the liquidators. Trotsky is very fond of using the learned and pompous and high-sounding phrases to explain historical phenomena in a way that is flattering to Trotsky, since the numerous advanced workers become active agents of a political and party line, which does not conform to Trotsky's line. Trotsky settles to the question unhesitantly, out of hand. These advanced workers are in the state of utter political bewilderment, whereas Trotsky, is inevitably in a state of political firmness and the clarity that keeps to the right line, and this very same Trotsky beating his breast of the fulminants against factionalism, paternalism, and efforts of intellectuals to impose their will on the workers. Reading things like these, one cannot help asking oneself, is it from a lunatic asylum that such voices come? The party of the question, the liquidationism, and the condemning it before the advanced workers as far back as 1908, while the question of splitting away from a very definite group of liquidators, namely the Nasha Zara group, i.e. the only buildup of the party, which was without this group in the opposition to it, and the question raised in January 1912, over 2 years ago. The overwhelming majority of the advanced workers declared on the force supporting the January 1912 line. Trotsky himself admits this fact when he talks about victories and about the numerous advanced workers, but Trotsky wiggles onto the simply onto hurling the abuse and these advanced workers and calling them splitters and politically bewildered. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under the cover of Outcries for Unity. He continues on to say, this is a clear, precise, and documentary defense of the liquidationist policy and the criticism of the Pravda policy. Well, and any literate person say that both trends employ the same methods of the struggle of organization on this question? Will any literate person say that the liquidators of not pursuing the liberal labor policy, this question, the liberal menace of the working class movement, is purely imaginary? The reason why Trotsky avoids on the facts and concrete references is because of the restlessly to refute his angry outcries of the pompous phrases. It is very easily, of course, to strike in the attitude and say a crude and sectarian travesty, or to add still more in the stinging of the pompous catch a phrase such as emancipation from the conservative factionalism. But is this not very cheap? Is this not the weapon of borrowed to the arsenal period when Trotsky posed in his splendor before audiences of high school boys? Nevertheless, the advanced workers with whom Trotsky is so angry at would like to be told painfully clearly, do you know or do you not approve of the method of struggle and organization that is definitely expressed in the above quoted appraisal, a definite political campaign? If you then are pursuing the liberal labor policy, betraying Marxism and the party, to talk of the peace or of unity with such a policy, with groups which pursue such a policy, the means of decisiving yourself and others? If not, then say so painlessly. Phrases onto the anguish satisfy the immediate and present day workers. Incidentally, the policy advocated by the liquidators and above the quoted passage is a foolish and one even from the liberal point of view. The passage in the Bill of Duma depends on the Zimitova Octoberists of the type of Benningsen, who has already shown his hand in the committee. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under the cover of Outcries for Unity. Then he finally says in the section Caelliox was talking about, in these days of the old Iskra, 1901 to 03, these waivers inflated of the economists to the Iskaris, and back and double of the Tushmo Tokos, the name of given Trobulis, and times in Rus, to fighting men who went over to the one camp and another. When we speak of liquidationism, we speak of the definite ideological trend, which grew up in the course of many years in the stems of Menshevism and economism, in the 20 years history of Marxism, and connected with the policy of the ideology of definite class, the liberal bourgeoisie, and the only grounds that the Tushnil turncoats have for proclaiming that they stand above groups and they borrow their ideas from one group one day and from another the next day. Trotsky was an Indira Iskarist in 1901 to 03, and Rystov described his role of the Congress of 1903, Lenin's cudgel. At the end of 1903, Trotsky was an arrogant Menshevik, i.e. he deserted from the Iskras to the economists. He said between the old Iskra and the lies a gulf. In the 1904 and 1905, he deserted to the Mensheviks and occupied facilitating the position of cooperating with Martov, the economist, proclaiming his absurdly left permanent revolution theory. In 1906, he approached the Bolsheviks and in the spring of 1907, he declared that he was in agreement with Rosa Luxemburg in the period of de-integration. After a long non-factional vacillation, he again went to the right and in August 1912, he entered in the bloc of the liquidators. He has now deserted them, and again, although in substance he retaliates their shoddy ideas. Such type of characteristics of the blossom and the past historical foundations in the time when mass working class movement in Russia is still dominant, and when every group had the ample room, when it imposes the trend of the group or faction, in short, a power negotiating the acclamation with others. Vladimir Lenin, Disruption of Unity under the cover of Outcries for Unity. None in this address and response does Lenin criticize Trotsky for a permanent revolution. Rather, the former listed things I have provided, even in the full context, the very section Caelliox quotes here, he is criticizing in his, at the time, bourgeois economist outlook. Leon Trotsky was able to change in his time while in New York, rereading Marx, Engels, and then reading more on Lenin. He finally returned, and he had fully broke with the Mensheviks and joined the Bolsheviks and started organizing for them and realizing the Trotskyist deviation that the Mensheviks still held and practiced on. He says in the July Uprising by Leon Trotsky, the revolution aroused great hopes in the masses. Among the masses of Petrograd played a leading role in the revolution. These hopes and expeditions were cherished with the exponential earnestness. It was the task of the Social Democratic Party to transform these hopes and expeditions into a clearly defined political programs, to the direct and revolutionary impatience of the masses, into the channel of the painful political action. The revolution was brought face to face with the question of state power. We, as well as the Bolshevik organization, stood in the handing over the power to the Central Committee of the Council of Workers, Soldiers, and Peasants delegates. The upper classes, and among the must include the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks, escorted the masses to support the Milkov government up to the last moment. That is time when these more distinctly imperialist figures of the provisional government resigned. Both the above-mentioned parties were firmly united with the government all along the line. Only after the reconstruction of the government did the masses learn from their own newspapers that they had not been told the whole truth, and they have been deceived. They were then told that they must trust the new coalition government. The revolutionary social democracy predicted that the new government would not differ essentially from the old, that it would not make any concessions to the revolution, and would again betray the hopes of the masses. And so it came to pass, after the 2 months of a policy and weakness of the demands of the conference, of the verbis, of the extortions, the government's position, the bleakouting of the issues no longer concealed. It became clear the masses had once more, and this time more clearly than ever before, been deceived. Leon Trotsky, The July Uprising. Here he is pointing out the hypocrisy and liberal actions of the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries, as well as their entire deception and their entire deceived actions to the masses in Russia. He's clearly made here a break between with the Mensheviks, and clearly has taken into the actual Marxist line and has completely split with the entire of the Trotskyist position in their front. This is very much clear. Anyways, let's see this argument that apparently us Trotskyists make that would surprise people. Namely, they argued the Bolshevik Party on Lenin's initiative had rearmed itself ideologically by accepting Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Thus, history had confirmed correctness of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Wow, that is surprising. It even surprised me, and I'm the Trotskyist. Come on, jeez. I really have to ask Caelliox who are these people, because I never saw any Trotskyist make this claim. And ever. And further, I'm starting to doubt that these people even exist. If they do, then if one of them is watching this video, then I can help at least the best I can with other comrades for them to understand the theory. But he quotes actually in his book, 1905, Bolshevism under the leadership of Lenin, though not without internal struggle, accomplished its ideological rearmament of the most important question of the spring of 1917, that is, before the seizure of power. Leon Trotsky, 1905, the book. Now, this is implied as he quotes. This is very much not the case. Now, how this is implied as he quotes isn't very much not the case. But not only this person uses it this way. Karl Radek used this for his horrible criticism of permanent revolution. This is what Leon Trotsky had to say to him, which it seems that Leon Trotsky has to say to Caelliox, which then I'll now quote. These two quotations have been subjugated since 1924 to a furious barrage of criticism. Now, after the delay of 4 years, Radek also is joined with this criticism. Yet one reflects consciously upon the quoted lines. It must be admitted on contained the important progenitus and no less important warning. The fact does remain that the moment of the February Revolution, the so-called old guard of the Bolsheviks held the position that the counterposing the democratic dictatorship of the socialist dictatorship out of Lenin's algebraic formula, his closest disciplines made by the purely metaphysical construction of the directed against the real development of the revolution. At a most important historical turning point, the top of the leadership of the Bolsheviks in Russia adopted a reactionary position, and had Lenin not arrived so opportunely, they could have knifed the October Revolution under the banner of the struggle against Trotskyism, as they later knifed the Chinese Revolution. Very previously, Radek describes the false position of the whole leaning party stratum of the sort of accident, that as little value as Marx's explanation of the vulgar democratic position of the Kamenev, Zianev, Stalin, Molotov, Rekov, Kalinin, Nogin, Milyutin, Kozuski, Fruz, Yorolsky, Odiskus, Pridoskus, Hensky, fuck, Russian names, Smilga, and a dozen other old Bolsheviks. Would it not be more correct to acknowledge that the old algebraic Bolshevik formula contains certain dangers within it? Political development filled it, as always happens unto the impetuous revolutionary formula, with a content of the hostile proletarian revolution. It is the self-evident that if Lenin had lived in Russia and had observed the development of the party day by day, especially during the war, he would have given the necessary correctives and the clarifications in time. Luckily for the revolution, he arrived soon enough, even though delayed to undertake the necessary ideological rearmament. This class instinct of the proletariat and revolutionary pressure of the party rank and file, and prepare the entire preceding works of Bolshevism, made impossible for Lenin in struggle with the top of the leadership, and despite their resistance to switch tire policy of the party, a new track in ample time. Does it really follow from does it really follow from this that today, except for China, India, and other countries, Lenin's formula of 1905 is algebraic form, i.e. the empiricity, and that we must leave it to the Chinese and Indian Stalin's Rakovs, Tang Pingshan, Roy, and others to fill the formula with a petty bourgeois national democratic content, and then wait until the timely appearance of a Lenin who will undertake the necessary correctives of April 4th. But is such the corrective assured for China and India? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to introduce this formula, those specific corrections and the necessary for which has been demonstrated by historical experience both in Russia and in China? Leon Trotsky, The Permanent Revolution. Absolutely amazing response, Leon Trotsky. So, you and I, dear viewer, are supposed to believe that a person who joined the Bolshevik Party in 1917 managed to, through internal struggle, rearm the entire party ideologically to make a change of 100 degrees? Does this claim have any basis in reality, though? No, it does not. Firstly, Lenin took steps to dissociate himself from the theory of permanent revolution after his return to Russia in April of 1917. He is literally referring to Lenin in that quote, and is saying that he had joined the actual practical analysis of Leninism and what it actually means. I would urge Caelliox to read Trotsky's response again if possible, and they're still making this claim. Also, as for the latter claim, it is absolutely false. Even in the April Theses, he has this to say. In our attitude towards the war, which under the new provisional government of Lvov and co unquestionably remains on Russia and the part of the predatory imperialist war owing the capitalist nature of that government and the slightest concession of the revolutionary defensism is principle. The class-conscious proletariat can give under the contest of the Revolutionary War, which would really justify revolutionary defensism in the condition. A. That the power of the proletariat and the poorest sections of the peasants align with the proletariat. B. That the annexations be renounced in deed and not in word. C. That the complete break of the effect in actual fact with all capitalist interests, in view of the undoubted honesty of those broad sections of the mass believers in revolutionary defensism, who accepted the war as a necessity and not as a means of conquest, in view of the fact and are being deceived by the bourgeoisie. It is necessary with the political toughness and the persistence and the patience to explain the error to them, to explain the inseparable connection existing between capital and the imperialist war, and to prove that without overthrowing capital it is impossible to end the war by a truly democratic peace, a peace not imposed by violence. The most widespread campaign for this view must be organized in the army at the front of fraternization. Vladimir Lenin, The April Theses. And he also says, 5. Not a parliamentary republic to return the parliamentary republic from the Soviets of the workers' deputies would be retrograde step, but the republic of Soviets of workers, agricultural laborers, and peasants, deputies throughout the country, from top to bottom, the abolition of the police, the army, and the bureaucracy, the salaries of all officials, all of whom the elective displaceable at any time, not to exceed the average wage of the competent worker. Vladimir Lenin, The April Theses. Not in the April Theses, but after the writings, he even talks about the conditions for a revolution to be international and permanent until capitalism is defeated, to establish socialism. Capitalism has created an accounting apparatus in the shape of the banks, syndicates, postal service, consumers, societies, and office employees, unions. Without big banks, socialism would be impossible. The big banks are the state apparatus, which we need and to bring about socialism, and which we take ready and made from capitalism. Our task here is to merely to lop off the capitalistically multis, this excellent apparatus, to make it even bigger, even more democratic, even more comprehensive. The quality is transformed into from quantity will be transformed into quality. A single state bank in the biggest with branches in every rural district and every factory will constitute as much as 9/10 of the socialist apparatus. This will be countrywide bookkeeping, countrywide accounting of the production and distribution of goods, and this will, so to speak, we must look to our comrades outside of Russia as well, to see the revolutionary activity of the proletariat class as a class, something in the formations of the skeleton of the socialist society. Vladimir Lenin. Can the Bolsheviks retain state power? He also says in The State and Revolution, here we have a formation of one of the most remarkable and most important ideas of Marxism on the subject of the state, namely the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx and Engels began to call it after the Paris Commune, and also a highly interesting definition of the state, which is also of the forgotten words of Marxism. The state, i.e. the proletariat organized as a ruling class. This definition of the state has never been explained in the prevailing propaganda antagonism of the literature, the official social democratic parties. More than that, it has been deliberately ignored for its absolutely incomparable with reformism, and it is a slap to the face for the common opportunist prejudges of the Philistine illusions about the peaceful development of democracy. The proletariat needs the state. It is repeated by all the opportunists, social chauvinists, and Trotskyism, who assure us that this is what Marx taught, but they forgot to add that, in the first place, according to Marx, the proletariat needs only the state in which is withering away, i.e. a state also constituted that begins to wither away immediately cannot but wither away. And secondary, the working people need a state, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class. Vladimir Lenin, State and Revolution. It is very much clear here what he means, and is even saying that for socialism to be established, the revolution must never stop and be on the internet and be international for classes and money to be abolished. Caelliox proceeds to quote Lenin in the Petrograd City Conference of the Bolsheviks, where honestly it is taken out of context and is used not how it was supposed to be used. But this is something that is reading to Marx and Engels that either way I would still reject stagism. He is referring to this. He refers to this. Trotskyism, no czar but a workers' government. This is wrong. A petty bourgeois exists. God damn it. And then he refers to this. Trotskyism, no czar but a workers' government. This is wrong. A petty bourgeois exists. And it cannot be dismissed, but in two parts. The poor of the two is with the working class. Now, here's the entire final section we need to highlight. The proletariat must be shown how the revolution can be carried forward by the concrete measures. To carry the revolution forward means to achieve the self-government by independent action. The growth of democracy does not stand in the way of self-government. It helps us to raise our aims. The war can be terminated only by the transfer of power in another class, and Russia has come to the closest to that, but never unto the truce among the capitalists of all countries for the basis of exchange subjugated the nationalities. A commune is quite sustainable to the peasantry. A commune means complete self-government in the absence of any supervision from above. 9/10 of the peasantry should be for it. The bourgeoisie may reconcile itself, and the nationalization of land, the peasants take over the land. As a proletarian party, we must declare that the land alone will not feed people. To cultivate it, it will therefore have to set up the commune. We must be for centralization, but there are times when things can be best done locally. We should allow maximum initiative in the local areas. The cadets are already acting like officials. They tell the peasants, wait for the continent assembly. Our party alone provides slogans that really carry the revolution forward. The Soviets of workers deputies are fully capable of establishing communes in the local areas. The question is whether the proletariat will be well enough organized for the task of this. Is a thing we cannot estimate in advance. We must learn by doing. Trotskyism, no czar but a workers' government. This is wrong. A petty bourgeois exists, and it cannot be dismissed. But in the two parts, the poor of the two is with the working class. War to end the war by pacifist means is utopia. It may be terminated by the imperialist peace, but the masses do not wish such a peace. War is a continuation of the policies of a class. To change the character of the war, one must change the class in power. Vladimir Lenin, the Petrograd City Conference of the RSDLP, i.e. the Bolsheviks. It is very much clear here not is only recommending that we integrate the proletariat and the peasantry together, but as well as the fact that the formation of a proletarian state as the revolution fighting against capitalism as an international social relation. This entire section of the book is Vladimir Lenin even saying, because of the capitalist development in Russia, that the revolution and a functional worker state, i.e. the dictatorship of the proletariat, is possible within Russia. Because of the social relation in Russia, even under the Tsar, that facilitated capitalism. The only difference was they had a feudal law and remained, but a feudal law and remain is easily possible to be negated through the mix of the proletariat into the peasantry. In fact, this is pointed out by Friedrich Engels when he talks about Russia. The big bourgeoisie of Petersburg, Moscow, and Odessa, which has developed with unprecedented rapidity over the last decade, chiefly owing the railways in which cheerfully went smash, along with the rest during the swindle years. The grain, hemp, flax of the 12 exploiters whose whole business is built on the misery of the peasants and the entire Russian large-scale industry, which only exists in the thanks to the productive tariffs granted by the state, all have the important rapidity of the growing elements of the population, no interest in the existence of the Russian state, to say nothing countless army of officials which swarms over Russia and plunders her, and here constitutes the social state. And when Mr. Takchov assures us that a Russian state has no roots in the economic life of the people, that it does not embody the interests of the particular state, that it hangs in the air, I think it is not the Russian state that hangs in the air, but rather Mr. Takchov, Friedrich Engels, on the social relations in Russia. He also says, the revolution that modern socialism strives to achieve is briefly the victory of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie and the establishment of a new organization of society and destruction of all class distinctions. This requires not only a proletariat to carry this revolution, but also a bourgeoisie in whose hands the social productive forces have developed so far that they permit in the final destruction of the class distinctions. Among savages and the semi-savages, there likewise often exist no class distinctions, and every people has passed through such a state. It could not occur to us to re-establish this state for the simple reason that class distinctions necessarily emerge from the social productive forces developed. Only at a certain level of development of these social productive forces, even a very high level for our modern conditions, does it become possible to raise the production in such an extent that the abolition of class distinctions can constitute the real progress, can be lasting without bringing about stagnation or even decline in this mode of social production, but the productive forces have reached to the level of development only in the hands of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, therefore, in this respect, also is just as necessary a precondition of the socialist revolution as is the proletariat itself. Hence, a man who says that the revolution can be more easily carried out into the country, where although there is no proletariat, there is no bourgeoisie either, only proves that he has still yet to learn the ABC of socialism. Frederick Engels on the social relations in Russia. Thus is the reason for why we reject two-stage theory. The world doesn't work in stages, buddy. Capitalism is a specific social relation and a specific form of production that is very much different compared to feudalism and slavery combined. In capitalism, for the first time, it gave power to some sections of the individual to oppress other individuals and buy their labor power and produce commodities on which they sell it into the world market, which left merchants to become bourgeois. What is left in the peasantry and the petty bourgeois usually accede to the bourgeoisie or the proletariat, and to the new employees of the bourgeoisie to create the proletariat. As well as the fact that the transformation from feudalism to capitalism is pretty different than the methods we have made for the transformation from capitalism to socialism. We only use history as a method to understand the material world, not the fact that the material world itself repeats or is a method. Despite what the Trotskyists would have you believe, Lenin did not put forward in April 1917 the strategy of direct advance of the dictatorship of the working class in alliance with the poor peasantry as a corrected strategy for the realization of the bourgeois democratic revolution. On the contrary, the bourgeois democratic revolution, as the first stage of the revolutionary process in Russia, had already been realized politically in the February Revolution. The strategy of direct advance of the dictatorship of the working class in alliance with the poor peasantry was put forward into the new strategy for the new situation following the February Revolution, a new strategy for the second stage of the revolutionary process. How can there be a bourgeois revolution in Russia when Russia was very much capitalist and already from the transformations that hit the rest of Europe? There was heavy focus on commodity production and industrialization to produce those commodities further and further, so more people that had control over this property and the means of production could sell more and get profit, as well as pay workers wages by cutting the amount of labor time actually performed into the workday. Accumulating labor and commodities to create capital, and accumulating that capital to create a profit. This is only the tip of the iceberg as well. For these commodities to be exchanged and for this property owner to get profit, they would display them into the population for a price of money to get it, thus creating the means of the market. The market is a system or place in which commodities exchange. Thus, because of the generalization of commodity production, or in other words, focusry of commodity production, as Marx would say, gave the focus of distribution as well within the market because the market relies on the commodities to be exchanged by definition, which this definition is supposed to be its function. Consequently, it appears that the capitalist buys their labor with money, and that for money they sell them their labor. But this is namely an illusion. What they actually sell to the capitalist for money is their labor power. This labor power the capitalist buys for a day, a week, a month, etc. And after he has bought it, he uses it up in letting the worker labor during the stipulated time, and with the same amount of money with which the capitalist has bought their labor power, for example, with 2 shillings. He could have brought this certain amount of sugar and any other commodity. The 2 shillings with which he bought 20 pounds of sugar is the price of the 20 pounds of sugar. The 2 shillings with which he bought 12 hours use of the labor power is a price of 12 hours of labor. Labor power then is a commodity, no more, no less. So then is the sugar. The first is measured by the clock and by by other of the scales. Their commodity labor power, the workers exchange with the commodity of the capitalists for money, and moreover this exchange takes place in a certain ratio, so much money for so long, a use of labor power for 12 hours, weaving 2 shillings, and these 2 shillings they not represent the other commodities which I can buy for 2 shillings. Therefore, actually, the worker has exchanged his commodity labor power for commodities of all kinds, and moreover, at a certain ratio, by giving him 2 shillings, the capitalist has given him so much meat, so much clothing, so much wood, light, etc., in exchange for his day's work. The 2 shillings therefore express the relation in which labor power is exchanged for other commodities, the exchange value of labor. The exchange value of a commodity estimated in money is called its price. Wages, therefore, are only a special name of the price of labor and of labor power, and are usually called the price of labor. It is a special name for the price of a particular commodity, which which has no other repository than the human flesh and blood. Karl Marx, Wage, Labor, and Capital. Marx also says, real wages may remain the same, they may even rise. Nevertheless, the relative wages may fall. Let us suppose, for instance, that all means of subsistence have fallen 2/3 in price, while the day's wage have fallen 1/3, for example, from 3 to 2 shillings. Although the worker can now get a greater amount of commodities with these 2 shillings than he formerly did with the 3 shillings, yet his wages have decreased in the proportion of the gain of the capitalist. The profit of the capitalist and the manufacturers, for this instance, had increased 1 shilling, which means that the smaller amount of exchange values which he pays to the worker, the latter must produce a greater amount of exchange values than before, and the share of capitals in proportion of the share of labor has risen, and the distribution of social wealth between capital and labor has become still more unequal. The capitalist commands a greater amount of labor with the same capital. The power of the capitalist class over the working class has grown to the social position of the worker has become worse, and has been forced down to and still another degree below that of the capitalist. Karl Marx, Wage, Labor, and Capital. Thus, in this instance, this is happening. The property owner who employs individuals to work on this property would be an employer who owns the means of production, or in other words, the bourgeoisie. And for the property owner who doesn't hire anybody or employ them and works for themselves and sells what they produce into the market to supply the bourgeois, would be a self-employed laborer or a small business owner, or in other words, a petty bourgeois. Then you have the employed, the individuals who sell their labor power, which to put it simply here in this video would be your ability to work, and then work for a certain amount of time into the day and be paid a wage of each labor time performed, which would be a worker, or in other words, the proletariat. Then you have a proletarian who's employed but works a amount of actual labor performed, an actual limit of it, which an example would be a juggler or a prostitute. This is technically a worker in a really weird spot of the working class, which in other words would be the lumpen proletariat. Whatever be the power, the means of production which are employed, competition seeks to rob capital of the golden fruits of this power by reducing the price of commodities to the cost of production, in the same measure in which production is cheapened, i.e. the same measure in which there can be which more can be produced with the same amount of labor. It compels by the law, which is irresistible, a still greater cheapening of production in the scale of even greater masses of product. For smaller prices. Thus, a capitalist will have gained nothing more by his efforts than the obligation to furnish a greater product at the same labor time, in a word, more difficult conditions of the profitable employment of his capital, while competition, therefore, constantly pursues him with the law of the cost of production, and turns against himself every weapon that he forges, and against his rivals. The capitalist continually seeks to get the best of competition by the restlessly introducing the further subdivision of labor and the new machines, which though more expensive, enable to produce more cheaply, instead of waiting until the new machines shall have been rendered obsolete by competition. If we now conceive to the feverish antagonism as it operates in the market of the whole world, we shall be in the position of to comprehend how growth, accumulation, and the concentration of capital bring in their train and even more detailed subdivision of labor, an ever greater improvement of the old machines, and the constant application of new machine. A process which goes on to the uninterruptedly and feverish haste, and upon an ever more gigantic scale. Karl Marx, Wage, Labor, and Capital. The laborer seeks to maintain the total of his wages for a given time by performing more labor, either by working a great number of hours or by accomplishing more in the same number of hours. Thus, urged on by want, he himself multiplies and disastrous effects of division of labor, and the result is more he works, the less wages he receives. And for this simple reason, the more he works, the more he competes against the fellow workmen, and more he compels them to compete against him and to offer themselves on the same wretched conditions as he does, so that in the last analysis he competes against himself as a member of the working class. Machinery produces the same effect, but upon a much larger scale. It supplements the skilled laborers by unskilled, men by women, adults by children. Where newly introduced, it throws the workers upon the streets in a great mass, and as it becomes more highly developed and more productive, it discards them in additional though small numbers. Karl Marx, Wage, Labor, and Capital. An exception to the law has been added, namely by the workers who are employed in the manufacture of machinery itself. As soon as there is in industry a greater demand and a greater consumption of machinery, it is said that the number of machines must necessarily increase. Consequently, also to the manufacturer of machines. Consequently, also the employment of workers in machine manufacture, and the workers employed in this branch of industry are skilled, even educated workers. Karl Marx, Wage, Labor, and Capital. This was the economy of Russia since 1856, after a lot of economic reforms and pressure from the nations outside of Russia had to have them cave into the new system. Of course, this is the basis for the understanding of the social relation of capitalism, but it drives the point nevertheless. This was capitalism, and it heavily relied, even before the 1905 revolution was even thought of happening. The thing that made Russia different was the fact that they still had production somewhat reliant to landlords ruling over the land and having peasants live on that land and produce goods that would be taken from the landlords and given to the Tsardom of Russia. However, this was becoming less and less relevant, but it was still there. And when in Europe, they were able to negate the peasantry, landlords, and the monarchy completely. Russia was just trying to catch up, thus gave them the term semi-feudal. But as we analyze, this wasn't because they were feudalists that were going into capitalism, as Caelliox here is implying. In reality, they had already facilitated capitalism by a huge degree and met the requirements. They were capitalists only with a feudal remain. As I pointed out to Heikim in my response to his video on commodity production, which you should go watch, it would probably be on the top right there, that in 1913 to 1915, Russia made up 40% of the entire world's capital, not just Europe, keep in mind. This was the entire world. From 1913 to 1915, they made up more capital than Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, and Switzerland combined. This is even sourced by Vladimir Lenin himself in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Caelliox proceeds to take another out-of-context quote from Vladimir Lenin, tries to justify his claims, and here is what he quoted. The present situation in Russia represents a transition from the first stage of the revolution to the second stage, which is to place the power in the hands of the proletariat and to the poor strata of the peasantry. 2. The specific feature of the present situation in Russia is that the country is passing from the first stage of revolution, which, owing to the insufficient class conscious and organization of the proletariat, placed power into the hands of the bourgeoisie, to its second stage, which must place power into the hands of the proletariat and to the poorest sections of the peasants. This transition is characterized, on the one hand, by a maximum of legally recognized rights. Russia is now into the freest belligerent of the countries in the world. On the other, by the absence of violence towards the masses, and finally, by their unreasoning trust in the government of capitalists, those worst enemies in peace and socialism. This peculiar situation demands of us an ability to adapt ourselves into the special conditions of party work among unprecedentedly large masses of proletarians who have just awakened to political life. Vladimir Lenin, The April Theses. Come on, Caelliox. This is clear as day that what he refers to as stages of the revolutionary movement of Russia, and not as economy or politics. Rather, the movement of revolutionary movement being displayed in Russia by the workers, which the Bolsheviks had to use to their advantage, which the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries failed to do, trying to stay at the formations of Soviets with no party to be a part of it. This is clear as day, dog. Come on. Caelliox, I'm going to be real with you. You can just admit you're wrong here. I don't understand why you keep on this logic when the evidence you provide is clearly saying the opposite. The only reason you should be doing this is if you somehow were against something that you know for a fact it is true that contradicts your understanding, or something holding you back. Which I think I've already drawn up my conclusions. You are worried about your intellectual credibility if you you are worried about your intellectual credibility. If so, then honestly, you would actually be more credible if you were to just say that you were wrong on these fronts. Yeah. 2, you would be worried on the online reputation you had set up for yourself online. If so, then honestly, who cares? It's the internet. Seriously, it's the internet. Who the hell cares? Or 3, you know for a fact on these issues, and you know for a fact that what I'm saying here is correct, yet you will still deny this to try and justify an ideology despite the evidence that discredits it. And if the third, you might as well just admit that you're not credible when it comes to Marxist and Leninist theory. If it's neither of the entirety of the 3 conclusions, then it's worse than I thought about your entire situation at this moment. The belief expressed by Trotskyists is unlike what Lenin is saying, based on the denial of the fact that the February Revolution constituted politically a bourgeois democratic revolution. Funnily enough, Trotsky himself admits that the Bolsheviks opposed his own theory before 1917. He proceeds to take an out-of-context quote from Leon Trotsky in his letter to Mikhail Olinsky. However, it is almost worthless to bring this up in the normal conditions, as Trotskyists will just proclaim that the entire Bolshevik party changed their entire line in 1917. He refers to this part of a section in his letter to Mikhail Olinsky. By placing myself in the perspective of the permanent revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat, while at the time the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were adopting the point of view of the bourgeois revolution and the democratic republic, I had not realized that the 2 fractions were separated by such a deep divergence. Leon Trotsky, letter to M. Olinsky. This quote is being presented that Leon Trotsky had said that Vladimir Lenin was disagreeing with him in his occasion, but in reality, he was talking about the disagreement with the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks in general, and was trying to explain to Mikhail Aminsky why he had doubt the Martovist social democrat line, other than the accusations of the mistranslations of Marx's works from Kautsky. In the letter, Trotsky writes, "What if explanations accomplished my letters? They would tell the disgrievances I had at the time with the Bolsheviks. I briefly mentioned in the preface of the Bourgeois of the results of process that I do not see the need to return this subject in connection of discovery of the letters and the archives of the police. Moreover, the retrospective and the review of the factional struggle could still now give rise to the controversy because I confess frankly, I do not think at all that in my disagreements with the Bolsheviks, I was wrong on all my points. I was completely wrong in my assessment of the Menshevik fraction. I overestimated its revolutionary capabilities, and I thought possible to isolate and neutralize the right wing. However, the fundamental error is due to the fact that I was analyzing two fractions, Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, by placing myself into the perspective of the permanent revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat, while at the time the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were adopting the point of view of the revolution of the Democratic Republic. I had not realized that the two fractions separated by each deep differentiations, and I was hoping, I have repeatedly expressed the letters and reports, that the course of the revolution itself would lead them to the program of the permanent revolution and seizure of power of the working class, which was particularly achieved in 1905. Lenin's preface to the Kautsky article, "The Driving Force of the Russian Revolution and the Position of the Nationalist Newspaper." I estimated my appreciation of the driving force of the revolution was so undoubtedly correct, but that the consequences I pulled of the two factors undoubtedly false. Only Bolshevism, thanks to the rigidity of its principles, could rally onto the true revolutionary elements, and among the intellectuals and the advanced fraction of the working class that time. And it is only because it managed to create its compact revolutionary organization that it could switch quickly from the democratic revolutionary position in the socialist revolutionary position. Leon Trotsky, letter to Aminsky. None of this says that he admits that the Bolsheviks disagreed with him. He was explaining from a third person perspective that what had gone down and his further studying of Marxism outside of the works from the Second International, which led him to agree with Vladimir Lenin and be one with the Marxists, who to completely split with the Second International and its lies of revisionism, as well as alongside with Lenin and the Bolsheviks founded the Third International after it was shown that the revolutions from 1917 to 1923 were going downhill. He even wrote in the manifesto of the Communist International, approved by Vladimir Lenin, he writes, "The statization of economic life against which capitalist liberalism used to protest so much has become an accomplished fact that there is no turning back from this fact. It is impossible to return not only to the free competition, but even the domination of trusts, syndicates, and other economic occupiers. Today, the one and only issue is we shall henceforth be the bearer of the statization production in the imperialist state, the state of victorious proletariat. In other words, is all toiling mankind to become bound slaves of victorious world cliques who, under the firm name of the League of Nations, aided to the international army and international navy, will here plunder to the strangle of some peoples and the curbs of others, while everywhere they're always shackling the proletariat and the sole object of maintaining their own rule? Or shall the working class of Europe be of the advanced countries and other parts of the world taken to the hand and disrupted and ruined the economy to assure its regeneration upon socialist principles to abolish classes? Is it possible to shorten the epoch of crisis through which we are living only by the measures of the proletarian dictatorship, which does not look back into the past, which respects neither inherited privileges nor property rights, which takes unto the starting point needed of the saving and starving masses, and and to this end mobilizes all forces and the resources, introduces universal labor conscription, establishes the regime of labor discipline, and other in the course. In a course of a few years, not only and thus heal under the gaping wounds inflicted by a war, but also on the raise of mankind to new and unpredicted heights. Leon Trotsky, Manifesto of the Communist International. Which is even talked about by Vladimir Lenin in State Revolution, which led him to approve it, which is evident because the book he makes the transition from capitalism to communism, separate from the first phase of communist society in Chapter 5, is self-evident enough. But from this capitalist democracy and its inevitability to narrow this stealthily pushes aside the poor and therefore hypocritical and falls through. For development does not proceed simply and directly smoothly towards the greater and greater democracy, as the liberal professors and petty bourgeois opportunists would have us believe. No, forward development, i.e. development towards communism, proceeds through the dictatorship of the proletariat, and cannot otherwise, for the resistance of the capitalist exploiters cannot be broken by anyone or in any other way. And the dictatorship of the proletariat, i.e. the organization of the vanguard of the oppressed as the ruling classes, for the purpose of suppressing the oppressors, cannot result merely in an expansion of democracy, simultaneously into the immense expansion of democracy, which for the time of the becomes democracy for the poor, democracy for the people, and not democracy for the money bags. The dictatorship of the proletariat imposes a series of restrictions on the freedom of the oppressors, the exploiters, the capitalists. We must suppress them in order to free humanity from the wage slavery, and their resistance must be crushed by force. It is clear that there is no freedom and no democracy there is where there is suppression, and where there is violence. That violence is with the ongoing abolition of classes. Vladimir Lenin, State and Revolution. Vladimir Lenin also says, and so, in the first phase of communist society, usually called socialism, bourgeois law is not abolished, and it's entirely, but only in part, in the proportion of the economic revolution. Insofar, only in respect to the means of production, bourgeois law recognizes them as the private property of individuals. Socialism convenes them into common property. To that, the extent of the alone bourgeois law disappears. However, it persists onto the other part that is concerned. It precess of the capacity of the regular determining factor of distribution of products and the allowment of labor among the members of society. The socialist principle, he who does not work shall not eat, is already realized to the other socialist principle. An equal amount of products for an equal amount of labor is also already realized, as is not yet communism, and does not yet abolish the bourgeois law, which gives the unequal individuals in return for really unequal amounts of labor and the equal amounts of products. This is a defect, says Marx, and is unavoidable in the first phase of communism, for we are not indulged in utopianism. We must not think that the overthrow of capitalism people will at once learn to work for society without any rules of laws. Besides, the abolition of capitalism does not immediately create the economic prerequisites for such a stage. Now there are no other rules of those bourgeois law to this extent. Therefore, there still remains a need for a state, while safeguarding the common ownership of the means of production, would safeguard equality in labor distribution of products. The state withers away, as there is no longer any capitalists, any classes, and consequently no class can be suppressed. But the state has not yet completely withered away, since there still remains the safeguarding of the bourgeois law, which satisfies actual inequality. And for the state to wither away completely, complete communism is necessary. Vladimir Lenin, State and Revolution. Caelliox and his friends like to claim that when presented with this, that Vladimir Lenin here is entailing classes to exist, when Vladimir Lenin never says that, and says that there is no equality for people to produce an amount of labor like into society, which will be compensated with labor vouchers. That is the bourgeois law mode of distribution, not a remain of classes. He makes that clear, as well as even it makes it clear in the first chapter, meaning of the state withering away is the means of the conditions of society and the new formations of free association, from his readings on Frederick Engels. Speaking of Frederick Engels, as I quoted before, he had said this in Principles of Communism, as, again, I quoted before, "Will it be possible for this revolution to take place in one country alone? No. By creating the world market, big industry has already brought all the peoples of Earth, and especially the civilized people, into such a close relation with one another that none is independent from what happens to the others. Further, it is a coordinated social development of the civilized countries, to such an extent that in all of them, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat have become the decisive classes, and the struggle between them and the great struggle of the day. It follows the communist revolution will not merely be a national phenomena, but must take place simultaneously in all civilized countries. That is to say, at least in England, America, France, and Germany. It will develop in each of these countries more or less rapidly according to one country, or the others at the more developed industry, greater wealth, and a more significant mass of productive forces. Hence it will go to the slowest and will meet to the most obstacles in Germany most rapidly, and with the fewest difficulties in England. It will have a powerful impact in the other countries of the world, and will radically alter the course of the development which they followed up to now, while greatly stepping up its pace. It is a universal revolution and will have a universal range. Frederick Engels, The Principles of Communism. Note the fact that he says that the achievement of socialism from the revolution can't happen in a national phenomena, rather an international one, which means that the revolution is never completed and countries until capitalism has been defeated, and until by the revolution of the working class, which is exactly what permanent revolution means, to make the revolution permanent until capitalism is defeated. For Marx is saying it himself in his address to the Communist League, but these demands can in no way satisfy the party of the proletariat. While the democratic petty bourgeois want to bring the revolution to an end as quickly as possible, achieving at most the aims already mentioned in our interest and our task to make the revolution permanent until all the more or less property classes have been driven from their ruling positions, until the proletariat has conquered state power, and until the association of the proletarians has progressed significantly far, not only in one country, but in all the leading countries of the world. That competition between the proletarians of these countries ceases, and at least the decisive forces of production are concentrated into the hands of the workers. Our concern cannot simply to modify private property, but to abolish it, not to hush up class antagonisms, but to abolish classes, not to improve the existing society, but to find a new one. Karl Marx, Address to the Central Committee to the Communist League, which entails to what Karl Marx pointed out to Joseph Wiedemer in his letter to him while in New York. And now as to myself, no credit is due to me for discovering the existence of classes in modern society and the struggle between them. Long before the bourgeois historians had described the historical development of this class struggle, and the bourgeois economists of the economic economy of the classes. What I did was to prove, one, that the existence of classes is only bound up at the particular historical phases of development of production, historische Entwicklung der Produktion. 2, that the class struggle necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat. 3, that this dictatorship itself constitutes the transition to the abolition of all classes to lower and higher phase of communism, a classless society. Karl Marx. Marx to J. Wiedemer in New York. This is your entire explanation, Caelliox, all from Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. In his Permanent Revolution, Leon Trotsky deliberately confesses to the political bourgeois democratic revolution of March with the bourgeois democratic revolutionary economic and social changes that followed the revolution of November, in order to present the latter a bourgeois democratic revolution which resulted into the dictatorship of the proletariat. He proceeds to take another out of context quote from Leon Trotsky in the Permanent Revolution. Clear, I think. He is referring to this quote by Leon Trotsky that, again, was taken out of context. The bourgeois democratic revolution was realized during the first period after October, but as we know, it was not realized into the form of democratic dictatorship, i.e. the working class and the peasantry, but in the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The two lines, the permanent and Lenin's, were completely fused by the October Revolution. Now here's the entirety of that section from the Permanent Revolution by Leon Trotsky. That is how Lenin spoke, not occasionally, but always or the more accurately invariably, when he gave a finished and generalized perfected evaluation of the revolution, including October. Things have turned out just as we said they would. The bourgeois democratic revolution was realized in the coalition of the workers and the peasants during the Kerensky period? No, during the first period of October. Is that right? It is. But as we now know, it was not realized in the form of democratic dictatorship, but in the form of dictatorship of the proletariat. And with that, there also disappeared the necessity of the old algebraic formula. Leon Trotsky, The Permanent Revolution. He even says no to the question that the Kerensky period was a bourgeois democratic revolution. Rather, it was a political formation of bourgeois democracy. In other words, a bureaucracy. But not of capitalism, for there was already that. He even justifies this by quoting this from Vladimir Lenin in Proletarian Revolution and the renegade Kautsky. But beginning with April 1917, long before the October Revolution, that is, long before we assumed power, we publicly declared that and explained to the people, the revolution cannot now stop at this stage, for the country has marched forward capitalism and has advanced ruin its reached unprecedented dimensions, which, whether one likes it or not, will demand steps forward to socialism. For there is no other way of advancing, of saving the country, which is exhausted by war, and of alleviating the sufferings of the toilers and exploited. Things have turned out just as we said they would. The course is taken into the revolution has confirmed the correctness of our reasoning. First, the whole of the peasantry against the monarchy, against the landlords, against the medieval regime, and to that extent, the revolution remains bourgeois democratic. Then the poor peasants, with the semi-proletarians and the exploited against capitalism, including the rural rich, the kulaks, the profiteers, and the extent of the revolution becomes a socialist one. To attempt to raise an artificial Chinese wall between the first and second, and to separate them by anything else than the degree of the preparedness of the proletariat and to the degree of its unity with the poor peasants, and means monstrously to distort Marxism and vulgarize it, to substitute liberalism in its place. It means smuggling and reactionary defense of the bourgeois against the socialist proletariat by the means of scientific references into the progressive character of the bourgeoisie as compared to medievalism. Vladimir Lenin, The Proletarian Revolution and Renegade Kautsky. As for your clarity, no, it's not that clear when you're talking about a lot of what Leon Trotsky says here out of context and misunderstands what he's saying. He proceeds to quote Stalin in a sarcastic remarks to Trotsky. I honestly don't feel it as validity now, since we are able to deconstruct his interpretation and horrible criticism that honestly I am surprised for being made. So I would say it is very much fair to it's very much just fair to, you know, like not just quote that and just continue and just like essentially continue that as obsolete, because yeah, no, like as we demonstrated, his entire arguments here is just fucking bland, to say the least. Anyways, I think that's actually going to be it for today, everybody. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, then hit the like button down below. I very much appreciate it. If you're new to my channel, hit the subscribe button. I would also very much appreciate it. Like I said earlier in my past 2 videos, I have a Discord now, and I have a I'm going to probably be more active on Twitter and all of those things. So yeah, follow me on Twitter and possibly join the Discord, so that way we can actually build up a community and actually build up some form of revolutionary or some form of actual consciousness to people, you know, at least independently, at least for me as a person. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. And this is again a multi-part series, so you'll probably see kind of like various other kind of like parts in the end scene, and possibly here as well. And I recommend you go watch them as well to understand the totality of this video. But yeah, thank you for watching, and yeah, Socialist Links is out.